I was trained by Al Gore in 2007 to present his climate change slideshow, which got him an Oscar. And so I was essentially in India presenting that to, in the end, thousands of school students and teachers and whatnot, to be under the Himalayan stars, show this slideshow and try to explain it, but to show one or more of the slides would have Psalm 104 or something like that rolling down. And the 200 Muslim kids are reading from the Christian Bible without me asking them to do anything. It was just, I'd never thought of that, but it was magic.
When I think of temperatures rising, or when I think of the bushfires over 18 months ago now, or I think of the floods from this year, it can be so traumatic and so overwhelming that I'm frozen with response. I give it over to God and go, okay, God, you made the world the first time. Please do something about what needs to happen next, because it feels so broken and so beyond my response. But at the same time, I look at my own life and I look at disposable things, or I look at my consumerism. I look at my reliance on electricity or heating or whatever else, on how long my clothes last. Trying to think about what modifications to make just in my personal life, that's overwhelming, let alone what needs to happen in society and what influence can we have, and how do you change business when you don't even know anybody? Like that can feel really overwhelming. And yet I think the thing about being part of a congregation, even having the conversation, is actually we're not doing it on our own. If we try to do any of these things by ourselves, it's just too debilitating. But once we start working with somebody else and somebody gives us the sticker to put on the worm farm, suddenly things start to shift. So, that was one of the things that I saw with the kids when we were doing this stuff about, can you time your showers, and let's make a party of it. Let's have fun with this. And at the moment at Eastwood, people have planted sunflower seeds, and hopefully they will be beginning to sprout, and we'll take photos and we'll share them. That sense of, actually, I can participate in creation in a positive way. It's not all doom and gloom. Some of it is about, maybe I could make a difference.
Yeah, that's about where I'm at. There's a great need for a theology of hope. Theology and praxis go together, of course, in this, but it's what the Christian church can specifically bring to the ecological table or discussion. We know we're in a bad way as a planet and the people of it and life on the planet. It feels overwhelming. The resurrection's become increasingly important for me. I'm one of the people of the resurrection. I believe, because of the resurrection of Christ, that God is in charge and God will remake. I don't know what it's going to look like. I get a glimpse of something from the resurrection.
One of the signs of resurrection I experienced on Unicampus, the city campus in Parramatta. The building was only a year and a half old, and it was a 5-star rated eco building with every imaginable thing to bring it to highest practice of an eco building. And it became a model then for another 5 or 6 buildings in the Parramatta area. So there's now a precinct of buildings that are working to change the environment in which they are placed. So what had happened prior to that, there'd been a study where the local area in the built-up sections of Parramatta, the average temperature in that area, because of the construction, had raised a couple of degrees. Lack of green, so much concrete, the heat storage, all of that kind of stuff. And these buildings, now that they've started to be put there, are having the same kind of impact of trees, because they're green covered on the top and they've got all sorts of passive things built in. Even architecture can change things. I didn't know that.
the end of Tom Wright's book, Surprised by Hope, and it's very much about hope, the Christian faith's about hope. He says, because we believe this is God's planet and God has a good plan for it, that means that we get to help God. What we're doing, what we're called to do in the planet is to help God. That's why I love that thing in Swedish so much. Dear God, my dad's really smart. We get to help God with. The architect gets to help in his way, and the horticulturist gets to help in her way, and ministers get to help in our ways, and school children, they can really help. And we're helping God. Logical. What are we here for? We're here to help God to make or remake. So I think I love the technology. I'm no technologist, but I love the elegance of many of the solutions that have been found.
The most celebratory thing that we had on campus every year was the solar car competition. And Western would always do really, really, really well with it because they were always out to win it. But it was something that absolutely everybody on campus would get involved and engaged with. And I think that because people were around us, it changed the desire to go to hybrid or to go to electric vehicle. It changed the desire to have alternative modes of transport. I had so much interest in having an electric tricycle. I would park it in Parramatta Square and people would come down and look at it. And it got to the point where I'd leave a little message on it. If you want to have a ride or try it out, give me a call. People are interested in what are the ways in which we can do this rather than it just being about doom and gloom. So I think that gospel hope thing is so important.
Yeah, and there's another thing that's linked there. I haven't seen it so much in recent years, but early on in the noughties, I suppose, somewhere around there, I was quite active with the Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, more so than now. And I'd go to ACF or WWF or some other such organisation would put on a champagne and nibblies evening and present whatever project they were doing. And we'd go to some flash place and we'd be served with this, and we'd kind of circle, you know how it is, you circle around, you don't know anybody really and you're wondering what to do and whether you can talk with somebody, and eventually you do, and you ask each other, what do you do? That's one of the first questions. And I say, well, I'm a minister in the church. And they go, several times it's happened, oh, that's fantastic. I got this really strong sense that people are waiting for the church to be the church.
Oh, yes. So what does it mean to you? How is the church when it is being the church?
Well, there's koinonia is a much used word, I think, but there's certainly a fellowship. It's a 30-something-year-old tradition of having breakfast with colleagues 2 times a month, Monday mornings. And now we do it in the Zoom room, so there's not so much breakfast anymore. We all know the bad stories, about the failure stories.
I think COVID and lockdown has challenged us about what does it mean to be the church, because I think we were drifting into a definition of church that was centred around worship. And traditionally for the Uniting Church at least, but arising out of World Council of Churches papers, the concept of church as being worship, witness and service, there was a tendency for us to think of church as being worship with witness and service tagged on. Whereas I think that lockdown has pushed us into, is church just worship? Is all that we're trying to still do in lockdown, is all we're trying to do worship? Does going online mean that that's all that we do? And I suspect that if all the church is worship, then let's just watch songs of praise every week.
Yeah, if that's what you mean by worship. Worship is ascribing to God God's worth. That doesn't need to be done in all kinds of ways. The Landcare people. And yes, we need to locate that in what God, yet again, dear God, my dad's really smart. I think actually horticulturists is a very basic kind of work, because then it's chapter 2, actually. The sense in which we're all God's gardeners.
And that was one of the things when we visited Burke and we met Buster family out at Burke. Great people of faith, and their connection with the land was very much based on their belief about God.
Yeah.
And the movement from having been enormous consumers of water and pulling stuff out of the land to moving into what do we need to put in to care for this land the way God wants us to. And you could see that they had moved in that thinking over time. I think for many of us, for most of us, when we're in the garden and tending the garden well, there is a sense of spirited life, connecting with God, trying to honour God in that moment in the garden, an awareness. And I'd hope that, I've got a picture behind me at the moment of Eastwood Church and the garden there. And it struck me that I hope that as we start to regather, that we spend more time in the garden. Let's be aware that's about worship, but that's also a witness, the garden. And whether or not it's cared for and caring, and whether or not we're seen to be people who have a good relationship with creation. Is a witnessing thing too.
Oh yeah, one of the things I was proudest about in Sweden. I never, as I said, never thought of myself as a gardener. We bought this modest house in a Swedish country. It had lots of roses, but there wasn't enough grass for the kids to play in. So we transported the roses into another bed. And years later, one of our neighbours told us, "You have a fantastic rose plot." So I think that image of the gardener is a pretty important one.
Well, I hope